There's been a lot of talk about Iran using perhaps Russian air defense systems to thwart Israel's attack. But now there's also the strategic partnership agreement, which includes defense cooperation. I think Syria is a great place to also jump off here too, because Russia did provide very concrete requested assistance to Syria during what was a U.S.-Israeli backed invasion. So I'm curious about your thoughts about Russia-Iran cooperation right now. What is the significance of this strategic cooperation around defense? And of course, this is coming as Israel, as you reported, these are fake reports, but they're including Russia, and Russia is saying that they're ready to mediate any conflicts that are happening in West Asia right now. So I'm curious your thoughts on the role of Russia.
Well, again, there's a lot of misinformation or disinformation in the West about the Iranian-Russian relationship. And regarding this agreement, first they said that the new Iranian president was not interested. Then they said the Russians were not interested. But the relationship between Iran and Russia has evolved dramatically after the war in Ukraine, economically, at all levels. And it continues to grow as we speak. In the summit that we saw in Kazan, we saw the relationship between Iran and Russia, how it has evolved there as well. President Putin and President Pezeshkian met twice over the past few weeks, once in Turkmenistan and then in Kazan. Also, I should add that the Chinese president, President Xi, he met 5 heads of state in Kazan. One was the president of Russia, and another was President Pezeshkian. So you can see how the relationship between Iran and China has also evolved. But I think this is basically because of the Americans. The Americans, BRICS has the United States to thank for the rise of the organization. Without the U.S. antagonism towards Iran, Russia, and others, BRICS would have never been created. And if it had been created, it would have just been some conference or organization where leaders speak and then go back home after a day or two. What has made BRICS a serious organization with ambitions is U.S. policy, European policy towards Iran and Russia. So, but BRICS aside, the Iranian-Russian relationship has evolved a great deal. And the antagonism being shown towards the two is increasing that even further as we speak. And I don't think it's going to have I don't think the U.S. election will have any impact on this, because I don't see a Kamala Harris improving relations with Iran or Russia, and I don't see a Trump improving relations with Iran and Russia. I mean, some say that Trump would be better for Russia, but I don't see how the conflict in Ukraine is going to be easily resolved. The Russians have expectations after making all these sacrifices. If Trump concedes, then that is a major defeat for the United States, and Trump will be hammered, if not destroyed, politically. And if he does not give the Russians what they want, then there's no reason why the Russians will not continue to move forward to attain their objectives in Ukraine, which they can do, because Ukraine is falling apart as we speak. Things are really bad in Ukraine right now. And of course, we've been saying this from the beginning. Just like in Gaza and the conflict here, we've been saying that the Israelis will not be able to take Gaza. I was saying this literally from the first couple of days. It's been over a year. I've been on record saying that the Israelis will not win in Lebanon. They haven't. And against Iran, the same is true as well. But, the West, in their arrogance, in their sheer arrogance, and, because of the legacy, 500 years of empire and colonization and Eurocentrism and exceptionalism, they can't see the world objectively. So they continue to think that somehow they'll overcome, somehow they'll defeat their foes. But what they're doing is that they are losing ground at an astonishing pace. The empire is dying very rapidly. And the war in Ukraine and the Holocaust in Gaza, the extermination of the Palestinian people, is destroying the West, because the world sees the West as a part of this extermination. Right now in northern Gaza, they've surrounded, there are different estimates, from 200 to 400,000 Palestinians. The Israelis have surrounded them, and they're preventing food or aid from getting in. Do you think if CNN and the BBC for 1 week they did rolling coverage on northern Gaza, just 1 week, it would end. The siege would end. True, the BBC and CNN have lost their influence, and mainstream media is losing its influence. But still, the elites in the West, that's who they turn to. They don't listen to the real people who know what they're talking about. If CNN and the BBC did rolling coverage on northern Gaza, the US government would be shamed into intervening. They would be forced to intervene, and so would the Europeans. That's not the intention. That is not the objective. The objective is to allow the Israelis to go as far as they want. And this is demolishing the West because the world sees this. I was on the BBC a few days ago or a couple of weeks ago, I don't remember exactly. And I said this as something about this being a Holocaust or a genocide and the person who was interviewing me said, many people in the West don't believe this and they reject this. I said, you can't hide this from the world. Everyone sees what's happening. We see it when we wake up in the morning. We see it before we go to bed at night. We see it happen throughout the day. It's happening 24 hours a day, slaughter 24 hours a day, every day of the week. So the West has demolished itself, but what they've done is that they've created, not only have they created an environment for convergence among countries in the global South or the global majority, but they've created a strong incentive for Iran and Russia to grow closer to one another. And they've made Iran and Russia very popular. Iran, which has been demonized for well over 4 decades, now people are looking at Iran differently. They're saying these are the people who are supporting the people of Palestine, and they're doing it on their own. So Iran and Russia, people want to have better relations with Iran and Russia. So to a large degree, the West is responsible for the improved relations between the two countries. They are responsible for the emergence of these non-Western organizations. And I think that the relationship between Iran and Russia will continue to grow.
I think it's a great point that the dual aggression, especially on the part of the United States toward both Iran and Russia, is a big reason why they are coming together. But what do you believe are the other reasons in terms of perhaps their own interests beyond that of external aggression? That may be playing a part here, because we've seen Russia, of course, take a very diplomatic stance on a lot of what's happening in West Asia. But at the same time, it's quite clear the general trend and arc of history right now is that relationships like Russia's and Iran's are on the rise. A big part of that seems to also be a more clear understanding on the sides of countries like Iran and Russia of what their own interests are. So I'm curious on maybe you could speak first to the Iranian side of what exactly about Russia is attractive in terms of a stronger and better relationship.
Well, Danny, I think it's the same for Iran and Russia for the most part, and that is that we are still colonized, but we're intellectually colonized. So we traditionally still think that, if we want to do business, if you want to get an education, if you want to immigrate, you go to the West, you go to Western universities, you do business with Western companies, and we've neglected one another, countries across the global South. We have not been properly looking at the capabilities and the strengths that exist in non-Western countries. So a lot of focus has been on the West, but very little focus on Russia or China or India or countries across the global South. But now that's changing. So when Russia and Iran, because of the sanctions, were forced to rethink their economic policies, they seriously pursued the North-South transport corridor that goes from Russia through Iran to the Persian Gulf, both sides of the Caspian Sea and through the Caspian Sea as well. Now, the North-South transport corridor should have been developed decades ago, but since our focus has always been on the West and how to deal with the West, we neglected this potential, this enormous potential. Through Iran, Russia will have access to the subcontinent, the Indian subcontinent, to Eastern Africa and the whole of Africa, and the whole Indian Ocean, the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Peninsula. And through the North-South corridor, Iran has access to the huge Russian market and Russian resources and Belarus, which is for Iran, Russian trade going through Iran is enormous too. It benefits Iran enormously. So this should have been done and completed decades ago, but it's now being taken seriously because the two countries have been forced to rethink their policies. And when they are forced to rethink their policies, they suddenly recognize this huge potential that could solve many of their problems. And if they had exploited this potential before, they would be in a very different they would have been in a very different situation today than they are now. The same is true with military cooperation. I don't want to go into details, and there are many details that I don't know. I don't pretend to know too much. But Iran's military capabilities are enormous, and Russia's military capabilities are well known. As I said, most of the missiles were down by Iranian indigenous capabilities. And there are other capabilities that Iran has. The Russians also have well-known capabilities. We've seen it, how they performed against NATO weapons in Ukraine for 2.5 years now. And there's political cooperation, the two countries both being sanctioned right now. They have a strong incentive to create mechanisms for trade without using the dollar, Western financial institutions. These are the two countries that are. Russia has the largest natural gas resources in the world, and Iran is second to Russia. And Turkmenistan, which has huge resources, is in Central Asia. And both Russia and Iran have huge oil resources. So the energy market is deeply influenced by these two countries. And Russia, of course, has huge potential to invest in Iran's energy sector as well. So the two countries complement each other a great deal, and they are neighbors. We are neighbors through the Caspian Sea. Europe is very far away from us, and Europe is on the decline anyway. The United States is across the ocean. They're not friends with us, but that aside, Russia's our neighbor. So Russian grain for us is much cheaper than importing grain from other parts of the world. There are huge advantages for both Iran and Russia. And I think we have to really thank the United States and the Europeans for opening our eyes to these to the potential that exists within this relationship, but also to other partnerships that can be defined within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization alongside BRICS, but also bilateral relations. As I said, President Xi, when he was in Kazan, he met with 5 leaders. One was the Iranian president. So a lot is happening, and I think the West has only itself to blame for what's happening.
Indeed. And I wanted to ask you to follow up on this, Professor Marandi. When it comes to these partnerships, these big relationships, maybe the biggest in the world right now in terms of their strategic importance and their importance on overall development, Russia, Iran, Russia, China, Iran. I wanted to ask you, when it comes to Iran and when it comes to what's happening in West Asia and how it relates to nations like Russia and China, do you feel that because both of these countries do play such an important role diplomatically and they're very strategic, how can you assist without facing greater aggression, greater targeting from the United States? How do you exist and assist at the same time? I feel like Russia and China have been trying to work that out. And I wanted to ask you, should there be a broader regional war, do you think Russia and China would stand back, especially Russia, given the fact that Russia's relationship to West Asia has been so much deeper? It seems like all roads are leading to Iran with this war path backed by the United States and Israel. And if that were to occur, do you feel like these countries would be able to sit back anymore? I know that China definitely does not want to be militarily involved, but at the same time, when it comes to Russia, for example, it seems like given that it was requested to assist Syria, that it's willing to engage when it has to engage. I'm just curious on your thoughts on this.
If, God forbid, there's a regional war, I don't think it will last very long, because if the oil and gas from the whole region just stops flowing, whether it's from Azerbaijan or Iraq or the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Peninsula, then the price of oil could go up to what, $400 a barrel? The global economy would collapse. I think that would end the war pretty quickly, because everyone will be it will be chaos. It will be chaos in the United States. The economy would fall apart, especially the United States, where people they have to travel a long way in their cars to get to work and go back. It's just going to bring down the global economy. And then imagine how many tens of millions of people will be on the move from Latin America and Central America to the United States then, because their economies would collapse. And imagine what will happen with the flow of people to Europe, because economies across Africa and Asia will collapse. A regional war, Danny, is not a war where it's not like in Ukraine. It's not going to be. If there's no more oil and gas, then there's no more global economy. Their jobs will be lost. People, it will be devastating. So God forbid we go there. And of course, Russia will be exporting at least for a few days, for a few weeks before the demand collapses, but they'll be exporting their oil at $400 a barrel. So I don't think the Americans would be very pleased about that. But a regional war would be devastating. No one wants a regional war. But if it's an existential threat to Iran, Iran will not hold back. So, there is a balance of terror between Iran and the United States. Just like during the Cold War, there was a balance of terror between the United States and the Soviet Union. There is now a balance of terror between Iran and the United States. The United States would be very foolish to try to engage in some sort of military conflict with Iran. Hopefully, we won't go there. The solution basically is for the United States to ultimately at some point overthrow Netanyahu. Political coup. They can do it if they want, but a regional war would be something that goes beyond my imagination. I can't comprehend the consequences. It's just beyond my ability to imagine. One thing that you didn't mention, and that is India and China. And I think the partial rapprochement between India and China, which was
Yes.
very important, it didn't resolve the border issue. The border issue is not something that can be resolved easily and anytime soon, I suspect. Possibly for many years, if not decades, if ever. Although there's never, forever doesn't make much sense, but it's not something that can be resolved easily. But this partial rapprochement was a big thing. And it shows that India and China see BRICS as very important. The rapprochement took place before BRICS. And it showed that both India and China feel that BRICS has to succeed, because both of them have an interest in alternative mechanisms for trade that are not influenced by the West. India has a large amount of trade with Russia. Iran is important as well, and India can be threatened by the West. And what India needs to develop, and they need a good relationship with China as well. So I think this was a very significant event coming right before BRICS, especially. But with regards to the first part of your question, if I understood it correctly, I think that for China, it is very important that Iran succeeds, because they know that if the United States has success with Iran and the West has success with Iran, that is bad news for China. The same is true with Russia, and the same is true with China. Regardless of uh, where, one is in West Asia, one is in East Asia, one is to the north, all of them are being antagonized by the West, and the West is behaving irrationally towards all of them. Ukraine, I know you've covered this 100 times. No need for me to go into the coup and the neo-Nazis and what they did to the Russian-speaking population. There's no need to go about the genocide in Gaza and the decades of tyranny. But one very interesting example of how irrational the United States is, if you recall, when the war in Ukraine began, the Americans tried to court the Chinese and try to draw them away from Russia, as if the Chinese are stupid. But what did they do simultaneously? If you recall, the Speaker of the House at the time, she traveled to Taiwan. You recall that because I think people were covering it when the plane was going and when it was landing. People across the world were following up on the news. The Americans, on the one hand, they try to cultivate China, and on the other hand, they slap China in the face. This is American policy. The Americans lie to the Iranians about the nuclear deal. They lied to the Iranians about negotiating a ceasefire in Gaza. They were lying. They were just buying time for the Israelis. As I said, the West is quite prepared to exterminate the Palestinian population. They are quite prepared to have this to go on and on for 3, 4, 5 years until the last Palestinian is wiped out. And throughout the BBC, CNN, The Guardian, the New York Times, Fox, they'll all be pursuing the same narrative that they're pursuing today. So everyone sees the West as a threat. A so-called civilization that's willing to exterminate one people, that is a very brutal so-called civilization. And so the Chinese know that, and the Iranians know, the Russians know that no one should fail. And many countries across the global south, BRICS countries, everyone knows that no one should fail, because if the West has success anywhere, then they will become more arrogant and more aggressive and push for more aggression elsewhere. So it is in the interest of Russia and China, it is in the interest of Iran to not allow this aggressive West to succeed.